Rain. Cold, relentless rain hammered the fields of northern France. Thousands of armored men stood knee-deep in mud, gripping shields and banners soaked so heavily they sagged under their own weight. Horses snorted clouds into the freezing October air. Steel rattled, priests whispered prayers, and across the field, a starving English army waited in silence, outnumbered, exhausted, dying from disease. Most of them were not noble knights. They were farmers, hunters, tradesmen, men carrying 6-foot bows carved from yew wood. And within a few hours, they would destroy one of the greatest armies medieval France had ever assembled. For centuries, the Battle of Agincourt became legend, a miracle, a masterpiece of tactics, proof that discipline could defeat nobility, proof that arrows could humble armor. But the truth is even more fascinating than the myth, because Agincourt was not simply a battle. It was the violent collision between two military worlds, the fading age of mounted knights and the brutal rise of mass infantry warfare. This is the story of how 6,000 Longbowmen changed history forever. To understand Agincourt, you first need to understand the man who marched into France believing he could conquer a kingdom. King Henry V of England was only in his 20s when he launched the campaign of 1415. But he was not reckless. He was disciplined, intelligent, deeply religious, and terrifyingly determined. England and France had already been fighting on and off for generations in what historians now call the 100 Years' War. English kings claimed they had a rightful inheritance to the French throne. The French, unsurprisingly, disagreed. For decades, the conflict had burned across castles, villages, and battlefields. Entire regions were devastated by raids and sieges. Dynasties rose and fell. Kings went mad. Noble families destroyed one another. And in 1415, Henry saw opportunity. France was politically fractured. King Charles VI suffered severe bouts of mental illness. Powerful French nobles fought among themselves for influence over the crown. Rival factions, the Armagnacs and Burgundians, were practically engaged in civil war. To Henry, France looked vulnerable, so he assembled an invasion force and crossed the English Channel. Not with some gigantic, empire-shattering army, but with roughly 12,000 men. Among them were thousands of Longbowmen, the backbone of England's military system. These archers were not random peasants handed bows before battle. English law had encouraged archery practice for generations. From childhood, many boys trained with the longbow every week. Skeletons discovered centuries later showed physical deformities caused by years of drawing enormous bowstrings. These weapons were monsters. A powerful English war bow could exceed 100 pounds of draw weight. Some may have reached far higher. Using one effectively required lifelong conditioning, and skilled archers could unleash arrow after arrow with terrifying speed. 10, 12, even more shots per minute. Not sniper fire, storm fire. A sky darkening with arrows. Henry's campaign began successfully enough. He besieged the port city of Harfleur. But the siege dragged on far longer than expected. Disease tore through the English camp. Dysentery spread rapidly. Men weakened. Horses died. Supplies dwindled. By the time Harfleur finally surrendered, Henry's army was in terrible condition. Many advisors urged him to sail home immediately. Instead, Henry made a dangerous decision. He would march across northern France to the English-held port of Calais. It was a calculated show of strength, a message to France. England was still here, still defiant, still dangerous. But the march became a nightmare. French forces shadowed the English army constantly. Bridges were destroyed, river crossings blocked. Food became scarce. The exhausted English soldiers trudged through rain and mud while sickness spread through the ranks. And with every mile, the French army grew larger. French nobles from across the kingdom gathered for what they believed would be a glorious victory. After all, how could this starving, disease-ridden English force possibly survive against the full might of French chivalry? To many French knights, the outcome seemed obvious. The English were trapped. By October 24, 1415, the two armies finally converged near the village of Agincourt. The English army may have numbered around 6,000 to 9,000 men. Most were archers. The French likely fielded somewhere between 20,000 and 25,000 troops, possibly more. Exact numbers remain debated, but nobody disputes the imbalance. The French heavily outnumbered Henry's army, and they possessed what medieval Europe considered the supreme force on any battlefield: heavily armored, mounted nobility. Knights were the elite warriors of their age, clad in steel plate armor, carrying swords, axes, lances, and maces. They represented military prestige itself. For centuries, cavalry charges had shattered infantry formations across Europe. To many nobles, war was practically their birthright. The English archers? They were socially inferior commoners. The battle ahead did not merely threaten French military defeat. It threatened the social order itself. The battlefield looked deceptively simple: a narrow strip of open farmland surrounded by dense woodland, freshly plowed earth, and, after days of rain, mud. Deep, sticky, suffocating mud. Henry immediately recognized the terrain favored him. The narrow field limited the French ability to maneuver or surround his smaller force. So the English formed a compact line. Men-at-arms stood in the center, longbowmen deployed on the flanks, and then the archers prepared something deadly: wooden stakes. Sharpened stakes hammered into the ground at angles facing the enemy cavalry. Simple, cheap, brutally effective. If French horsemen charged directly into the archers, the stakes would impale horses before they reached the line. This mattered because cavalry was terrifying. A charging warhorse could smash through infantry psychologically as much as physically. But disciplined defenses could neutralize that advantage. The English understood this, and Henry made another crucial choice. He forced the French to attack first. Morning came slowly beneath gray skies. The two armies stared at one another across the muddy field. Hours passed. Neither side moved. The French believed time favored them. The English were exhausted and starving. Why rush? Some French nobles reportedly argued over who would earn the glory of capturing Henry himself. That confidence would become catastrophic. Eventually, Henry ordered the English line forward slightly, bringing the archers within range. Then, the longbowmen began shooting. Thousands of arrows screamed into the air. The psychological effect alone was horrifying. Imagine the sound, the snap of bowstrings, the hiss overhead, the hammering impacts on armor, shields, horses, flesh. Contrary to popular myth, longbows did not magically pierce every suit of plate armor head-on. Good armor could resist many arrows, but that misses the point entirely. The arrows did not need to kill every knight instantly. They needed to create chaos, and chaos is exactly what happened. French cavalry surged forward first, attempting to scatter the archers, but the ground betrayed them. The rain-soaked field turned beneath pounding hooves into a swamp. Horses lost speed. Formations broke apart. Then they hit the stakes. Animals screamed and collapsed. Arrows slammed into horses from every angle. Even when armored riders survived, fallen horses became massive obstacles choking the battlefield. The cavalry attack failed, and now the main French force advanced. Thousands of armored men pushed forward through narrowing terrain already churned into mud. At first, they came steadily. Then, the pressure from behind intensified. More men crowded forward. Ranks compressed tighter and tighter. Soon, many French soldiers could barely raise their weapons. Imagine walking through wet cement while carrying dozens of pounds of steel, while arrows rain constantly around you, while thousands of men shove from behind. Men slipped. When one fell, others stumbled over him. And in heavy armor, standing back up in deep mud became horrifyingly difficult. The French kept advancing anyway, because retreat was almost impossible. Too many bodies, too little space. Eventually, parts of the French line reached the English center, and for a moment, the battle became savage hand-to-hand slaughter. Axes crashed into helmets, daggers stabbed through armor gaps. Men grappled face-to-face in suffocating mud. The English line bent under the pressure, but it did not break. Then, the Longbowmen did something unexpected. Once many had exhausted their arrows, they abandoned their bows and joined the melee directly. This is often forgotten. The archers were not helpless support troops. Many carried swords, hatchets, mallets, and knives. And unlike the exhausted French men-at-arms struggling through mud, the lighter English fighters moved more freely. They swarmed isolated knights, dragged them down, attacked armor joints, visors, necks. Some French nobles suffocated in the mud beneath piles of bodies before they were ever struck down. Others were crushed by their own allies pressing from behind. The battlefield became less like a heroic medieval duel and more like industrialized human compression, a killing machine built from terrain, exhaustion, panic, and momentum. Then came one of the most controversial moments of the battle. During the fighting, Henry received reports that French forces might be attacking the English baggage camp in the rear. At the same time, thousands of French prisoners had already been captured. Henry feared that if the battle turned again, those prisoners could rearm themselves and overwhelm his exhausted army from within. So he gave an order that shocked even some of his own men: kill the prisoners. Many English soldiers hesitated. Noble prisoners were valuable. Ransoms could make common soldiers rich. But Henry insisted, and large numbers of prisoners were executed. Even by medieval standards, it was brutal. Yet from Henry's perspective, survival mattered more than chivalry. Agincourt stripped away romantic illusions about knightly warfare. When armies faced annihilation, ideals collapsed quickly beneath fear and necessity. By the afternoon, the battle was over. The French army had disintegrated. Bodies carpeted the mud. Thousands of French soldiers and nobles lay dead. The losses among the French aristocracy were devastating. Entire noble lineages were shattered in a single day. Meanwhile, English casualties remained astonishingly low by comparison. The exact numbers are debated, but the imbalance stunned Europe. Against overwhelming odds, Henry V had achieved one of the most famous victories in military history. And almost immediately, the myth-making began. In England, Agincourt became proof of divine favor. Henry himself encouraged this image. He portrayed the victory as God's judgment, a righteous triumph earned through discipline, faith, and courage. The battle entered legend partly because it appealed to something timeless, the underdog story. Outnumbered soldiers defeating arrogant elites, skill defeating status, preparation defeating pride. Centuries later, William Shakespeare immortalized the battle in Henry V. The famous Band of Brothers speech became one of the most celebrated pieces of war literature ever written. For many audiences, Agincourt transformed from history into national mythology. But the real battle was not clean or glorious. It was mud, exhaustion, suffocation, terror. And that reality matters, because Agincourt revealed a major transformation in warfare already underway across Europe. For centuries, mounted nobility dominated medieval battlefields. But Agincourt showed their vulnerability. Disciplined infantry, ranged weapons, terrain preparation. These could defeat even elite armored warriors. The longbow did not single-handedly end the knight. History is never that simple. Knights continued fighting for generations. Armor continued evolving. But Agincourt exposed weaknesses that commanders could no longer ignore. Mobility mattered. Discipline mattered. Logistics mattered. And increasingly, massed infantry and missile troops would shape the future of war more than aristocratic cavalry charges. In many ways, Agincourt symbolized the slow death of one military age and the birth of another. And yet, there is another reason this battle still fascinates people 6 centuries later. Because the English victory was never guaranteed. If the weather had been different, if the terrain had been dry, if the French had coordinated more carefully, if they had avoided attacking through such narrow ground, history might remember Agincourt very differently. That is what makes the battle so compelling. It was not destiny. It was a chain reaction of decisions, mistakes, terrain, technology, and human emotion colliding at exactly the wrong moment for France. One muddy field changed the reputation of armies, the image of kings, and the mythology of medieval warfare forever. Today, the fields near Agincourt are quiet. The mud is gone. The banners vanished centuries ago. But beneath those fields lies the memory of thousands of men who marched into battle believing the old rules of war still applied, and discovered too late that the world had already begun to change. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more cinematic history stories about legendary battles, forgotten kingdoms, and the turning points that reshaped civilization, make sure to subscribe and join the channel. Because history is never just about the past. It's about the moments that change the future forever.